Okay. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. We've got another great show for you tonight. Marek of SetiAstro is here tonight, and he's going to talk to us about his PixInsight scripts. So, but before we get to that, I'll just talk just a bit about the upcoming calendar over the next couple of weeks. Let me pull that up here. Share that. Okay, so next week we've got Kevin Boucher, and he's going to talk to us about AI processing, AI tools, and how that's impacted his processing workflow. Then the next week we've got Timothy Martin will be here, and he's going to talk about Nina and the sequencer power-ups plugin in Nina. So I know a lot of folks are looking forward to that and seeing how he uses that in his remote setup at Deep Sky West. And then the following week, just note we do not have a show for Labor Day weekend, so we'll all be off enjoying the last holiday of the summer. Then, as you can see here, we do have a number of open dates. So here's the pitch. If anyone out there has an idea, something that you've thought about maybe coming on the show to talk about, a process that you've worked up, or something that you'd like to share, just shoot us an email. Send us you can contact us through the website, and we'll get you on the show. So let me stop sharing here. All right, and as I mentioned, we've got next week, we've got Kevin Boucher, and he is actually here with us tonight. So Kevin, would you mind just giving us just a little bit about what you're going to be talking about next week?
Sure. So a lot of people obviously are using Russell Crowen's tools, Star Exterminator, Blur Exterminator, Noise Exterminator. What I'm going to talk about, and some of the other AI tools that are out there that are being used too, but I primarily use those, and I'm going to talk primarily how I use those tools and how it massively changed my workflow and the quality of the images that I'm producing now as a result. And a lot of it is, I'm not getting a lot of that background stuff, that I used to get in terms of, like with Blur Exterminator, I used to use things like deconvolution tools in PixInsight, and you're not getting a lot of the worms and all the other negative effects that those tools used to give you. These AR tools really allow you to do a lot of different things that you weren't able to do before. So I'm going to get into my workflow step by step, the hows and whys of everything that I do, and the results I'm getting out of it. So that's basically the genesis of it.
All right. Well, that sounds great. So, and I'm looking forward to that. And I know that those tools, Russ Croman's tools, have really been a game changer for me too in a lot of ways. So, yeah. So that will be great. So, all right. Well, that brings us then to tonight's guest, Marek, and Frank started releasing his SetiAstro PixInsight scripts really just a few months ago, and he's been really prolific since then. So initially there was just one or two or a handful, but that number has really grown. At last checked, I saw there were 11 scripts, and then he's been updating them pretty frequently as well, based on feedback from users. So these are all really useful scripts, and so we were thrilled when Frank accepted our invitation to appear on the show tonight. So Frank, if you're ready, we'll turn it over to you.
Yeah. Hey everyone. Let me get my screen pulled up. Okay. Yeah. So as you may or may not know, I'm Frank Marek. I am SetiAstro. That's my YouTube channel and my website. Just a quick background about me. I was a Navy nuke electrician on submarines, and then after that, after I got out, I've spent the last 14 years now in the industrial space, repairing large electric motors and generators. And when I got out of the Navy, you can't see a lot of stars on a submarine, so really started my astrophotography journey shortly after getting out of the Navy. So that's who I am, and I started the channel really just about a year ago, and just covering what I was shooting, and it slowly built up from there. And after my pixel math tutorial video, realized not a lot of people like pixel math, and maybe jumping into assisting the community with scripting. I'm not in software development at all. I didn't know how to code anything. So what I did at first was turn to ChatGPT. Like so many others were like, hey, let's just have AI write my script, or there are all sorts of people doing things with that. So I really started out, hey, are you familiar with PixInsight? Do you know about scripting in there? And had quite the lengthy conversation on actually getting any scripting to work. I also was very grateful on the PixInsight forum that there was a introduction to PixInsight scripting, and there was a lot of great information on there. So if anybody out there does want to start scripting, I would highly recommend watching that video. And that's really what allowed me to, talk coherently to an AI in order to help me actually write some of these scripts and get my ideas into PixInsight. So my very first script was star stretch, and the math in here is going to carry over to some of the other scripts. So it is a good baseline. Before we jump into the math around that, I really wanted to understand what PixInsight itself was doing for stretching and everything else. So there is some reference documentation in PixInsight. It's actually under the XISF spec. This is their full-blown spec. So it's more than just the extension that we use in the files, right? It's a full-blown imaging specification. And buried in this spec is how to go around and actually stretch the images in there. There's a whole section for the display function. I won't spend a lot of time in here, but this midtones transfer, this is your histogram transformation. So when you're moving that midtone slider, this is the math it's doing in there. They define some other things like a clipping function, kind of go through some examples of that. They go through and say that they use MAD or MAD. It's a statistical measure in their clipping function, and then they go ahead and define a fully automated stretch. And everybody would recognize this in PixInsight as the screen transfer function. So behind the scenes, when you're just doing an STF, this is actually what it's doing. It's doing this statistical analysis in the background and stretching your image based on that. So with all that said, for the star stretch, here was our median transfer function from the actual reference documentation. And when I was stretching stars and I had somebody ask me to help them stretch stars, I noticed I was really just pulling up the histogram transfer, bringing the slider or the midtones down to about a quarter, and just, hit and execute multiple times until I got kind of what I liked. And that's what I recommended to that person as well. So I wanted to make that as my script. My very first one, get my feet wet, just help them stretch some stars. So using that midtones function in the reference document, and I knew I was pulling the slider down to a quarter, you could put the quarter in the math and simplify it, and you get this 3 times your target over 2 times target plus 1. If you go ahead and now put that back into the equation and have a quarter again, so that'd be like executing it with the slider down on a quarter and simplifying, you get this 9 times over 8 times plus 1. And you can put that back in and rinse and repeat, right? I just wanted to see what the function actually was doing when I did this multiple times. And you can see it's 3, 9, 27. Those are all powers of 3. So in the end, I got this blue rectangle here. That's really what the math is behind the star stretch script. So when you're moving that slider from 0 to 10, that's what you're doing. It's really just in an analytic way, kind of that repeated histogram transformation. And this math here is really the core, and we'll see in statistical stretch as well. So this was my first script. There's a color boost in there too. I'm going to be honest, the color boost was just kind of what I felt right when I was doing my stars, right? I not only making it for this other person at the time, I wanted it to just help me make my stars look prettier. So that's kind of what I built into that first script. Going along with star stretch, I also had a narrowband to RGB stars, and I was a big fan of the 4X palette utility for all narrowband stuff. I really like it, and I really love that it made really good RGB stars. And I wanted a way just to do the stars. In that particular script, you have to put all your starless images as well as your starred images in there in order to generate your RGB stars. So I really just wanted to go out and make a stars only kind of version of that, just to have nice narrowband to RGB stars. And the math on this one is a lot more simple. It's the normal pixel math you'd probably do doing your own stars. It takes your hydrogen and your oxygen, and then it does a synthetic green, and that's how it makes the RGB image for it. The nice thing with this, though, is it also has the built-in star stretch too. So you could dump your linear stars in there and come out with nice, pretty stars. So let's just look at it here a little bit. Here's PixInsight. I do have 3 stars only images, and everybody knows if you just do an STF on a stars only image, it's all messed up, right? So you need a good way of stretching your stars. One method is just preserving your STF from when you pulled the stars out and utilizing that to stretch them. But using the star stretch, you could have a little bit more control over it. So you can have a preview now if you want. It'll show you what the end result will be. Now we know what this slider does here. That is just like how many times you did the histogram transformation repeatedly, right? You could raise and lower that. This is a grayscale image, so color boost isn't going to do anything. And you can stretch your stars from there. And it'll go ahead and it just does it, right? This is your non-linear stars only image. For the narrowband to RGB stars, it's what I talked about. We have hydrogen and oxygen. In this case, I also have sulfur. When you're doing sulfur, it adds the sulfur and the hydrogen together into the red channel. We do want to apply the star stretch. We know what that is. So we can go ahead and even show the preview. You can see it just doing the math off to the side. And if that's what you like, if you like the colors and the boost and the stretch from there, then you can go ahead and execute, and it'll go ahead and put it all together for you. And now we have nice RGB stars from just the narrowband stars. And something simple like that, I thought this would be, kind of some great getting my feet wet, starting my scripting path, which apparently got pretty prolific in just a couple months. So those are kind of the base ones I started with. I think a lot of people really started seeing my scripts when I came out with statistical stretch. Under the hood, it's going to be using that same 3 to the power times the target kind of equation, but it's gonna do some different steps. And in this one, I do have a lot more examples and kind of talk about why I built it this way. But overall, when you run statistical stretch, what it's going to do is find a black point. Then it's going to stretch it. Then it's going to normalize it if you have that option, and then apply a curves boost. So if you remember back to the math here, where we had this big equation down here, what I wanted to do was have a method such that you could put in a target median and it would automatically stretch the median to that target. And in order to do that, we had what the user should define here. That's the big M. So let's say I want to stretch it to 0.25. That would go into the M. We know what the target median is. That's just, or the image median, that's just the median of the image we're currently at. But it means we have to solve for this X. And I know everybody loves math, so you're just going to love this logarithmic equation. But that's what you come up with. And you can simplify it down so it doesn't bog down PixInsight so much. Believe it or not, pixel math isn't the best at doing a lot of logs and exponents. But that's really what it's doing. We analytically solve for the solution such that when you go, I want my target median to 0.25, it puts the target median right at 0.25 for you. The big difference that I think is really apparent in mine is it doesn't just stretch the ever-loving heck out of the image like STF does. So let's go back and talk about why that happens and everything. It's actually in here. STF uses this MAD, the median absolute deviation. And then they have this little 1.48 factor in there. That's all well and good. And I understand most people aren't statisticians or anything, neither am I. But this only works for normal data. And I wholeheartedly disagree with their use of it in this case, because photons entering a telescope, it's not normal. It's not a normal distribution. It's a Poisson distribution, and it's completely different when you start getting really low noise values. So the reason STF stretches it really, really crazy is because they're using this MAD, and it's setting this clipping point really close to the median, and it's just stretching it really hard. And that's the big difference between my statistical stretch and kind of what STF's doing under the hood. My black point is determined based on standard deviations and not MAD. And then also the median is analytically solved to exactly get you what you want your median to be at. So that was a lot of talking. Maybe I'll take a breath and if there's any questions out there for all that, or I can keep going.
No questions yet, Frank, but I'm watching YouTube. Something will pop up.
Okay, sounds good. So I'm going to go ahead and I guess go into PixInsight here just to demonstrate some of the things going on. So let me get, I don't know why. I don't know why statistics isn't showing. Okay, either way, I'll just demonstrate here. We have just a green starless image here, my green channel, and it's noisy, right? It's what you would think of as just, you know, your initial image. It's in the linear state. STF does a normal stretch for it. When you go ahead and do something like noise exterminator on it, which you'll be hearing about next week, right? As we talk about all the AI tools. This is just applying that same STF to it, but as soon as you have it auto STF on it, this is where it goes haywire. And this is what I was saying, that it's because the black point is set just too close to the median. So for the same stretch, oh, here we go. I got him. Here, I could talk about it better now. We can. So on the initial image, MAD was this 4611 number, and the standard deviation was right at 7916. That follows really closely with that 1.48 times the MAD normalization, right? So 7900 is about 1.5 times 4600. That's why the stretch normally works fine when it's fairly noisy. If we go ahead and open the noise-free image after running Noise Exterminator, now you can see MAD dropped quite substantially, where standard deviation didn't drop nearly as much. It's almost an order of magnitude difference. And so the stretch is almost an order of magnitude harder with STF. So I'm going to go ahead and have generalized hyperbolic stretch here pulled up for us too, to look at some things as we actually go ahead and run statistical stretch. But I wanted to really walk through just what it's doing. All right, here is our linear image, and I got GHS up here so we can see the histogram. GHS is great for just having a histogram. It's really nice. So the first thing we do is define the black point. So there's the math for the black point. You're going to see the histogram dropped right to the bottom. I'm using standard deviation to define the black point versus MAD, and normally it'll just use the lowest pixel value, since the lowest pixel value, for the most part, unless your data is really, really, really noisy, is going to be a limiting thing and not standard deviation. So that's the first thing statistical stretch does, defines your black point. Then it goes through and does that stretch that we talked about. It analytically finds what it's going to be. And if you look at our statistics here after that stretch, our median now is 0.2500022. So it, like I said, it really nails what you want for your target median. And then the last thing, if you have it selected, it'll do a normalization. And all that's going to do is, if there's any room, any headroom at the very top of your image between 1 and your highest pixel value, it's just going to go ahead and stretch that little tiny bit up to the white point. So that's statistical stretch. That's the guts. That's the under the hood. That's really what it's doing. For an image like this, I wouldn't use 0.25. We could just go ahead and open the script and run it on the Galaxy here. All my scripts can be found, I guess I needed to say that, are under, script SetiAstro, and here's all my scripts. Statistical stretch. For a Galaxy, I would keep it down to like 0.10 is what I have in the instructions, just as a good starting point for like distinct objects, galaxies, planetary nebula, things of that nature. And then I do have a curves boost as well. And you could just click execute if you want a little curves boost in there. And it runs it for you. And it just does a nice stretch, right? It's controlled. It doesn't blow out anything. It fills your histogram up nicely. Like here's our histogram. It's really kind of what you want to see when you do stretching on your images. And, a lot of the time using GHS alone from the starting point, it can be tough. It can be clunky to stretch it from the linear to nonlinear state. So I've always thought of statistical stretch as just a great baseline stretch to get it nonlinear. It's based solely on the image statistics and the data that's in the image, right? So it is a scientific stretch, right? This is something you could use for those purposes. And then from there, we're also artists creating our pretty images. Here, go ahead. Now use GHS, use curves, start tweaking that contrast out, to however you like it. I just really wanted a good base stretch based on the image properties themselves to get it into a good nonlinear state. I did want to show that sometimes the MAD is just a very bad approximation to what's going on with the image. Here's the full color of the same galaxy we were looking at. And already you can see MAD is well off of the standard deviation by an order of magnitude. But after we run noise exterminator on it, it's going to get even worse. And we could just do that quick. Should be quick. And that's why it's going to be a lot more controlled. Now here we ran noise exterminator on it. And now you can see MAD is 2 orders of magnitude different than standard deviation. So now this is the time that everybody's experienced this. When you've ran STF on something like that, it just looks so ugly when you're trying to do it. And that's statistical stretch. That's everything under the hood for that. That's probably the most in-depth I've ever talked about statistical stretch. I'm a big fan of it. I may be a little biased, but for an initial stretch, I think it's just a fabulous script for that. Kind of moving beyond statistical stretch, I did collaborate with another individual for this fine background script. When we're doing color calibration, continuum subtraction, you run an SPCC, all these kind of odd items need a background in order to reference either the background colors or your floor median value, or if you're trying to find the SNR of an object, you need the sky background. There's a lot of things you need the background for, and sometimes it's kind of hard to determine where your background is, right? You're just trying to eyeball it usually. And what this script does is it uses the idea of gradient descent to find essentially the lowest point in your image. Now, there are some pitfalls with gradient descent. You could think of a ball rolling down a hill, how I have in this graphical representation. It's going to roll to the low area. But if we started the ball up on this other hill, maybe it would have rolled to this other valley, or maybe it would have got caught in this. So it does have a tendency to drop into these local minima. And the way we get around that for fine background is we just drop a lot of balls over the whole image and let them all roll downhill. and then we find the lowest one, really. And that's what's going on with find background. So we could just look at it one really quick. It's really important that you remove the gradients first, since it is using gradient descent. If you have a big gradient, it's just going to roll down with the gradient. But find background is great for doing these kind of things. It's it has a lot of options, but you're usually never going to touch any of them. You're just going to click search and it's going to go for it. The only time I would say to use an option anyways is this user defined exclusion area. If you had a big dark nebula in your image, dark nebula tend to have a color cast. They're not neutrally colored. They're usually like a ruddy brown, reddish. So if you use or allow the script to look over the whole image, chances are it's going to find the background in that dark area of the dark nebula, and that's not going to be your neutral background you want. So you could actually use this user-defined exclusion area. This doesn't have a dark nebula, but you can draw a square or a rectangle where you want to exclude any points in there. So it'll search everything outside that area. But normally for a galaxy like this, you wouldn't have an exclusion area, and you just go ahead and search. And behind the scenes on this one, it does look globally at the image first, chunks it up into various spots, finds the best kind of dark areas, then drops all your drops balls on the hills of your image. In this case, we set it up to have 40. It looks at 40 different locations and uses gradient descent in them. And when it's done, it'll find a preview for you to use in the background on background neutralization, color calibration, SPCC. And what we're going to talk about next is continuum subtraction, where it's very important for continuum subtraction. When it's done, it'll say it found a background and the preview was created. And in this case, here's the background it found. Using gradient descent, it naturally avoids stars and things like that. So you really don't have to tell it a whole lot to get a background image. Where background is really important is, like I said, continuum subtraction. This is an area where, I don't know, it seems like only the hardcore imagers have even started this, and I think everybody should be doing continuum subtraction on all their RGB galaxy images. If you're taking RGB for some dusty nebula, take some narrowband data. You never know what you're going to find. All our comrades out there doing astro imaging with us have been finding stuff, right? New things. The O3 arc over Andromeda, planetary nebula, all the time. There's just a plethora of stuff that amateurs like us are discovering out there. And this is a really key component, is continuum subtraction. So I built a whole script around it to help everybody just do it easier. Not everybody is familiar with all the steps that you gotta go about doing that, where you gotta combine your images, do color neutralization, color calibrate, then you're like pulling out reds, and there's a lot. So that's why I made the continuum subtraction script, because I feel everybody should be doing continuum subtraction, especially on galaxies and dusty things. Take some narrowband data. You never know what you're going to find. If you are going to use continuum subtraction, I recommend keeping the stars in your image. There's a really good reason for that. It's because Star Exterminator and StarNet take out objects that aren't stars, especially in galaxies. So here's Triangulum near the core. Here's it with all the stars. And if you remove the stars, you actually take out nebula that it thinks is stars. It's just because the galaxy's so far away. Nebula, globular clusters, things of that nature appear star-like, right? They appear to be point-like objects out there when they're really not. And an even better example is a smaller galaxy in the frame, like the pinwheel, with all the stars in it. This is the hydrogen data. There's all this nebulosity within the image itself, and if you remove the stars, most of the things around this galaxy that look like stars and are gone are actually part of the galaxy. You don't want to remove that stuff and have it no longer part of your continuum subtraction. The script itself is really easy to use. There's a starry or starless. Like I said, I recommend using starred images, but if you do have starless images, you could use those. You can go ahead and select your hydrogen image. Find mine. Just called it HA. For the continuum, if you have an RGB image, you could just use the RGB image. Otherwise, for hydrogen, you'll need a red, and then oxygen, you'll need a green, and sulfur, you just need a red in there. Also, I have an option in there to apply noise reduction within the process. So immediately after doing the subtraction in the linear state, it'll run either noise X or Graxpert denoise, depending on if you have one or the other, because it's really hard to remove noise once it's stretched in a non-linear state. And I do have the option just to output the linear image if you want to do your own stretching. But otherwise, if you just leave it as is like this, it's going to do everything for you. So we'll just click execute. It's going to extract the data it needs out of the colored RGB. It's going to go ahead and combine it with the hydrogen. It's going to do our color calibration by running fine background and doing the color calibration. It's going to do the continuum subtraction, run the noise exterminator, and then stretch it to be a nonlinear. So all that happened automatically for you. And what you're left with now is the pure hydrogen signal in your image. There's no continuum in this. This is the hydrogen structure in Triangulum. And now you could utilize this you could screen this back in on like the red channel to enhance your image. But it really shows you what the structure is in there now. And it's just amazing what you could find running continuum subtraction with some narrowband data in all your RGB images. I think it's a lot of fun. This is how other amateur astrophotographers are finding all these new objects out there is via this method. And I just love Triangulum. There's just so much here. It's just crazy. All right. Fine background was like the stepping stone to really utilizing finding those low points to making a gradient correction tool. I have a couple videos out there on my opinion about gradient correction process in PixInsight. If you want to go watch those, I'll reserve some of that for this video. And I do feel that Graxpert from time to time does remove structure that you don't want removed. AI tools are great, but sometimes the tried and true method of DBE is still going to be the best. And I do feel like if you do take the time with DBE, you're going to have a better gradient correction than like Graxpert or some other gradient correction processes out there. It just takes a lot of work to do DBE, right? So what this does is it takes all the work out of it for you. Overall, it's going to do a background neutralization. It's going to run ABE, the automatic background extraction, to take out the main gradient. Once the main gradient is gone, we could then run gradient descent on a whole bunch of points on the whole image. Let all those little pixels fall down, roll downhill, and then those ending points can then be used as your points in DBE. With how DBE is, the script itself has to calculate all the different weights. Because of how it uses gradient descent, it also calculates a sample radius for you. It could utilize the deviation between all the different points and the deviation within the points themselves to calculate a smoothing factor for you. So I really try to make ADBE as robust as possible. And as you heard in the beginning of the video here, I'm in constant communication with the community when I put out these scripts. So this has went through a lot of iterations too, to try to make it as good as we can for the vast majority of people out there utilizing the scripts. The big thing that I really like about automatic DBE is you can exclude areas, and none of the other gradient removal tools, you really can't exclude areas. So here's one where you do have a big dark nebula in here. You don't want that to be part of the gradient correction. And if we run other gradient tools on it, like Graxpert, I'm hoping I didn't freeze PixInsight. Oh no.
Hold the line.
Oh no, I know. Okay, yes. All right. Unfortunately, it didn't show the gradient. Oh, there it is. Okay. So
Frank?
you can see, yeah.
While we have a momentary PixInsight pause, I'm sure most people know, but just tell people how they get all your scripts.
Yeah.
And maybe you could put the link so we could just put it into the modules.
I think I already put it in the
Did you put it in the chat already?
Or in the video description? I probably did. Let me check. Yeah, it's in the description already. The repository link, as well as the link to his website and other stuff.
And there's a question here. Did you say that continuum subtraction also isolates the O3 continuum?
Yes. Yeah. Great question. So I'll pull back up. Yeah. So you could have any of these: hydrogen, oxygen, or sulfur, or all three. Right? It could do it all in one. So if you go ahead and shoot a full suite of SHO narrowband, and then you take your RGB image as well, you can go ahead and dump your hydrogen, oxygen, sulfur into the various drop-downs here for the emission line groups. And then for the continuum side, if you have an RGB image, you could just put it in there. Or if you have a mono camera like me, I would use the red and green. Blue really isn't necessary. Oxygen is about the same strength in both green and blue as far as the filter overlap, but most CMOS cameras are more sensitive in the green spectrum anyways. So your green channel is going to be cleaner for O3 for doing continuum subtraction. But yeah, you could put one or two or three different ones in there.
Franklin, Dennis is asking, is continuum subtraction also for one-shot color? You referred to RGB several times. Does that mean a color picture, a one-shot color?
Yeah.
RGB. Okay, combined RGB.
Yep. So if you do have a one-shot color camera, that would be your RGB. You'd put it there, and if you were using a dedicated hydrogen filter or an oxygen filter, just extract your red or your green channels for those. If you have a dual band filter, again, use the green for the oxygen and then the red channel for hydrogen or sulfur, depending on which dual band filter you have.
Okay. And Chris wants to know if you benchmarked your gradient removal stuff against the new PI gradient correction process, which is also computational rather than AI.
Yeah. Oh man. Yes.
Would you like to tell us about it?
Sure. I wouldn't use gradient correction if I had any other means of correcting a gradient. Gradient correction tends to remove a lot of structure. It is computational, but yeah, let's just go ahead and we'll just look at some examples
someday. Have a big discussion about it someday.
Yeah. So here's gradient correction, really quick on it. And hopefully you could start seeing right off the bat that there's other stuff in here that isn't gradient. You could tell it followed that dark structure of the dark nebula. Something you could do to really see what your gradients are when you're pulling them out is, I'll just show you. Okay, here's gradient correction on Triangulum. All right, it looks, I mean, it looks pretty good right off the bat, but if you then run something like ABE on this gradient itself, to remove the simple linear gradient out of there, we could see kind of really what it's doing on a smaller scale structure. Okay, so removing the simple gradient correction also removed all this stuff. All this stuff is not gradient. So I would caution you, and this is actually a good case. Gradient correction process can really pull out a ton of small scale structure. I would highly recommend just on YouTube, look up when good gradients go bad. I have a 2-part video covering gradient correction and kind of why you shouldn't use it, to be honest with you. Yeah, well, yeah, I'll just kind of leave it at that. But let's go ahead and look at what ADBE does, because I do want to show one other script here before our time's done. With ADBE, like I said, it has the really good added benefit of you can define exclusion areas. So in this case, we don't want any of that dark nebula to be in it. Also, right off the bat, you could define whether it's a degree 1, which would be a linear gradient, kind of left to right or up or down, or a degree 2, where it may look like vignetting on your image, to remove that simple gradient. And we'll go ahead and just run it at that gradient 1 and exclude those areas from the dark nebula. And first it runs ABE, and then it goes through and calculates some image statistics, and then now it does essentially gradient descent on all those different paths. And now here's the gradient it found there. With that dark nebula, it's not affecting the gradient in it. And you get a much better overall correction. And in this case, it may have actually overcorrected a little here in the corner because of that bright star. What you could do, and I find this is really important for this script, is you could just undo the DBE portion of it. And then in History Explorer, you could find, like, here's where it ran DBE. You could just drag that process off and double click it. And it's going to show you where all the points were. Oh, this is a bad one because it's so hard to see the points by the stars. But there's a point right here. It was right kind of by that star because it got stuck in gradient descent with all those other bright stars. And you can go ahead and just move that or delete it. And then you could just click execute, and it's just going to rerun DBE for you. And now that overcorrection in the corner because of that bright star isn't there. So that's the one thing I really like about using ADBE is there's no mystery as to what my scripts are doing. It's always in the History Explorer what it did, and you can pull those out, see what it did, and tweak it if you need to, especially when you're doing something like gradient removal. And if you use gradient correction process or Graxpert, it's a black box. You can't do that, right? You can't ever look into it and see what it was doing and fix that correction. So that's the biggest thing I like really about ADBE, besides the exclusion area, is there's no mystery as to what it's doing. It's just doing a lot of the hard work on DBE, placing all those points and making sure it's all correct. It's just doing that automatically for you, right? These scripts are really designed to just make these good processes in PixInsight easy and automate it for the most part. Before we're out of time, I do want to cover just quickly. I did make a Blemish eraser. It's like Clone Stamp, but better. So I know a lot of people don't like Clone Stamp. What it does is it looks in the surrounding areas. It's a lot more content aware, and it replaces where the blemish is with content from around it, like Clone Stamp, but in a much more controlled and a much better way. And then the other really fun one I like, and I definitely want to recommend everybody try it, is the What's in My Image script. You need an astrometric solution on your image, but it's like Annotate Image and TypeCat and Aladdin and all these other kind of things smushed into one user interface here for you. So you can go ahead and, like define areas, query Simbad directly. You could double click any of these rows and it's going to take you to the Simbad entry for that object. So you can go ahead and explore all these different objects in your images. I built in a whole suite of annotation tools where you can draw arrows to interesting things, or place a celestial compass, or draw a rectangle freehand, add texts, right? All these things that would be nice to do in Annotate Image, you could do in this now, and it's much more controlled. If you do click Advanced Search, now you can get into different types of things that you could search for. A fun one always to do is query for quasars. And I like doing them just because they're very distant and you can quickly see whether they're in your image. You can, double click on it, see if it has a redshift. This one has a redshift. And once you have a redshift, I like using this here. It's a redshift, distance calculator. It had a redshift of 1.323. We're in a flat universe. And that particular quasar is 13 billion light years away. That's the code moving radial distance. So, I mean, those are just some of the cool things you can tell people about your image, right? When you're exploring your image, this is the part of astrophotography I love, is this end bit where you get to explore your image and see all the cool stuff in there. Recently, I did the cosmic gecko or newt or whatever you want to call this thing. But I noticed this X-shaped thing right off the bat when I was doing my initial processing, and I thought that'd be really cool to see what the heck that is. And in here, you can go ahead and do the query and stuff with Sinbad, and there's a lot of her big Haro object. It's a reflection nebula. It's an emission line star. All that's right in there. But under advanced search, I also have a query the MAST database, which has Swift, Hubble, JWST, Spitzer. It has all that in the query. So you could always query that as well. And it's going to go ahead and find these objects that some of these big professional telescopes have found or have imaged. And sure enough, Hubble's imaged this thing. So you can, again, just double click on it. It's going to take you to the MAST website, the portal for it. The browser in PixInsight is a little clunky. So I normally always just open a new browser and copy and paste the address into it. You don't necessarily have to, but with this website, the MAST website, you can go ahead and download like Hubble data or any of these other space telescopes. And that's what I did for this particular X-shaped object. And the Hubble image is here. This is, raw Hubble data. And it's aligned right here with my little X that I had here. It's the same shape. It's all, I geeked out over this. I think it's just so cool. And with this what's in my image script, I've spent a lot of time just looking at my images, going through it. So I hope everybody else just loves using this stuff too. Well, I could talk for longer, but I got my time here. I guess I'll turn it over to the hosts.
So, Frank, I was just thinking in the What's Your Image, you could find the star that changed the universe, among other things. And we could also bore our family to tears.
Yes. Yeah.
An added benefit.
Everybody wants to know what all the cool stuff in your images, right?
We want to know.
Yeah, I got a comment when I first put the script out, like, well, you don't know everything in your image already before you image it. And I was like, you know everything in your image before you image it? That would impress me if you know everything that's going to be in your image before you image it. I don't know if the individual is just thinking that, oh, M87, how do you not know that's in your image? No, this is like nitty gritty. You could really dig into your images and see what's in them with the what's in my image script.
I'm so
and for those who haven't been at
excited
the
about
MAST
this.
database, that's a tremendous resource.
Yeah, and the fact that you can define your search area with what's in my image and query, just that, it hones in right away with, like you said, MAST is just so huge it's hard to find stuff in these catalogs. It truly is. So, being able to just kind of do one of these, and even if you're doing a Sinbad search, just to see right off the bat what you could find, it just makes it so much easier versus trying to export your images and go to Aladdin or a planetarium software or whatever the case may be. And super
especially
cool.
for like if you're not sure what catalog something might be in, you're just doing like the PixInsight annotation to find out what's in there, and you're like, okay, I could have all the databases and not be able to see anything in my image.
Right. and I do have this here. You could also just query the Vizier database, and I have a caution there, because if you make that circle too big, you may get thousands of hits really quick, depending on where in the sky you're actually pointing.
That's funny.
Have you ever thought about making something like this a process rather than a script?
Oh yeah. So again, I'm not in software at all, and if you remember, my coding partner is ChatGPT. JavaScript has been a challenge in and of itself. I usually spend my coding time crashing PixInsight over and over and over again, trying to make these scripts. I know the processes are very difficult to code. They're all in C++. They have to be platform agnostic, right? They got to be able to run on Linux and Mac and everything. And I just have a Windows. If anybody's out there that is in software development and would love to take one of these things and actually write a process for it, I'd be really open to working with anybody to do something like that. But I just don't have the skill set. I'm an electrical nerd, math nerd, but I'm not a coding nerd. So
I think there's some kind of rigorous process for getting processes approved for PixInsight, right? Like they only let certain ones through.
Well, you could probably put it in the PixInsight forum, and maybe someone would pick it up.
Yeah. Yep. There's a process. You got to be a code developer. All your stuff has to be signed now.
Yeah.
And you'll see when I open up my scripts, you'll see there's my code signature. So I am a valid coder, if you will, but yeah, processes are a whole nother thing.
Frank, if you wrote a process, or if there were a process to do some of the things that you have in the scripts, would you still be able to go back part way through your what is now a script and undo some things like you did with the dynamic background extraction?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't have the answer for you with that, since I don't know how the processes run, whether you can make breaks in there where it would have history or not. The thing that is really nice about a process, though, is you could use the real-time preview, which would be an amazing thing. Because right now, in order to make like this preview here, it's actually making a whole nother image in the background, right? And then, so like my blemish eraser here, it's making a whole nother image. If you go ahead and like remove a blemish, in order to have undo functionality in this, for me to click undo, now there's actually two images in the background, one with the correction, one without. And the more you do it, the more they stack in the background. And in a process, I think it's handled a lot easier. JavaScript scripting is just really clunky. I don't think it was ever designed to do this stuff I'm trying to have it do. But I'm trying to make it work. Hey, so that was anyways, blemish, my blemish blaster, just to remove that halo there.
Right,
but
like,
yeah,
when you run a process, the process is what's in the history. It's like if you make up this process, there's no breaking that down. Part of the idea of the scripts is that you're running multiple processes as a script, right? Or for some scripts, right? So you wouldn't be able to break that up, I don't think.
And you always have to be careful when you're removing processes because it doesn't fit your idea of what the image should be, that it may be something real.
Oh, this thing? That's a star. That's lens flare.
No, what I'm not saying this particular thing, but it's really easy for us to say, oh, that's not what it should look like, and click.
Oh, yeah, well, not only my Blemish tool here, which can remove satellite trails too now, but with background extraction, ADBE, there's time. I mean, just recently in a forum, I was asking the individual, what are you expecting it to look like after you remove the gradient? Maybe that thing you're trying to remove is actually supposed to be in your image, right? It may not be a flat image, especially if you're doing, like around galaxies and stuff. There's probably a lot of structure in there that, whether it's IFN or, whatever the case may be, that may be in your image. And just because you don't know it's not in there, you may be fighting trying to remove what you think is gradient, and it isn't. And there was a question about gradient correction. You can tweak these sliders to the point where you do get a nice flat image. But when you do that, that's where all that low level signal is just been erased. So that's my caution for everybody using gradient correction. Make sure you show your generate gradient model and run ABE on it and see what you're really removing with that particular tool.
I think we've got all the questions that were over there. There are a lot of comments and stuff. And a lot of people saying hello, hi. And, and I think we ought to address that a little bit, guys. I know you're a community out there, and I know there'll be a whole bunch more of you tomorrow and the next day, over the next week. Some 700, 800 people will probably watch the show. What we need, you're all pretty smart people, and you all know something you can contribute. What we need are more people who can contribute. You may not be able to contribute at the level that Frank did today, but you know something that would probably be helpful to people. So please sign yourself up. Hit the website, hit the contact us button, and let's volunteer to do some presentations out there. If you're going to be a community, it's good to be part of the community, an active part of the community. We could use a lot more help doing this. And now back to the regular show.
All right. Well, I think you've kind of showed what you had intended to show tonight, Frank. Is that right?
Yeah, I did.
All right. Well,
hopefully I wasn't too long-winded. And so
oh no, not at all.
You can stop sharing now if you want.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And all these scripts are just so impressive. And again, I mentioned earlier, it's not been that long since you've been doing this, and I'm not entirely sure I believe that you really don't know coding at all, because the level of quality that you've put into these scripts is anyway. But
I knew a little Visual Basic, and for Excel, and
perfect.
But beyond that, once you figure out how to talk to ChatGPT, it can really help. It really does all the admin-y legwork of just typing it up for you, right? And keeping track of all your variables and everything. And then when you get, every single time you'll get an error and you got to troubleshoot what's going on. But it's really helped me put my ideas into PixInsight, which has just been great.
That happens even if you know how to code. you run it, you're like, wait, no, why?
And if it makes a mistake, you can belittle it like a subordinate, and it'll just
You won't
fix
hurt
it.
its feelings.
That's right. Now, when we get smart enough where it has feelings, then we'll have to worry about that.
We don't have to talk
Yeah,
about
I've been trying to be polite to it in case it remembers when it does become sentient, that it'll still keep trying to help me.
You say please and thank you to it.
Yeah. By the way, once we end the show, Frank, we still stay on and chat a little bit.
Yeah, you're welcome
Okay.
to hang out when we sign off the live stream here.
Or if you don't want to, you can say goodnight.
Well, I think we're to that point now. I'm looking at the chat one last time. I don't see any additional questions. So just a lot of nice comments, Frank. So thank you so much for coming on tonight and showing us these scripts. And we'll look forward to whatever you come up with next. So.
Well, I get all my ideas from the community, really. So, the engagement out has been the driving force behind all this. So I hope that stays high.
Cool. Well, me too. All right, everybody. Well, we will see everyone next week. And Molly, take us out.
All righty.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.